Skylights in some of our bigger facilities. Again, I said we do lots of different facilities, but we do big athletic facilities and recreation facilities. We found, as that example shows, there's enough light in that gym from a few skylights that you never have to turn on the lights during the day, even on a gray day like today, to light that space and still use it for activity purposes. It's really, and this is something that we did, we've been doing this for almost 30 years. We found from doing some research, if you did 3% of the roof of a room, so this room, if it had skylights in it, this room's probably 1,000 square feet, maybe a little bit bigger. Let's say it's 1,000 square feet. What's 3% of 1,000? 30, is that right? So a 30 square foot skylight in this space, you wouldn't have to have the lights on at all during the day. And again, that was a cost saver. It's interesting, we still do this, but of course the LED lights have kind of brought the cost factor down to where you could do skylights because they look great, and I know the new building has a beautiful one, but you can also do the skylights still to save some money. The interesting thing is Walmart is the largest owner of square footage of buildings in the world. Nobody owns more square footage than Walmart. And Walmart puts, skylights in all their buildings. Now they do it for two reasons, energy, and also they found that skylights, unrelated to sustainability, people shop and spend more money in retail spaces that have natural light versus artificial light like we have here. So that's twofold, but again, it's saving them in all those buildings a significant amount of energy. Another one is ceiling fans. Again, we do a lot of rec centers and spaces where you can do ceiling fans. You can put them in public spaces, you can put them in activity spaces. By the way, one of the manufacturers is called Big Ass Fans, that's why I put them in quotes. But that's literally the name. There are probably some in the Bear, as far as I know, they might have some. But two reasons, and we were doing this also before LEED was in place, but one, people like to be in control of their environment. If you can go over and change the thermostat, some people like that. If you can turn on a fan and move air in the space and either make it cooler or warmer, depending on the season, that actually is kind of a big deal because there's a little bit of psychology that plays into that. The big fans can actually, because we turn them around seasonally, so fans can either draw air up or push it down. Hot air rises, so seasonally, when it's really hot, you want to keep it up there, but during the winter, you want to blow the hot air down. It actually has a fairly significant change, 4% savings in any particular space by just moving that air around. Now the air is moved from a duct into the room, but once it's dumped into the room, it stops moving. It's fluid dynamics, it's a physics problem. But if you can move it once it's in that space and continue to remix it, you have the savings. The other part of it, which is very interesting, a 5% degree difference, but it's perceived, particularly if someone's working out, if you're hot and sweaty, and you're blowing air across your body, normal evaporation, the perception is that it's even cooler. So it's kind of interesting. We're continuing to do these in public spaces and activity spaces as well. So I said I also talked a little bit about cost. And I wanted to start with a diagram. We use this with folks to talk about just long-term. Again, this is primarily for colleges and universities because they're long-term owners of facilities. So in this example, imagine a building that is 50 years old. You've owned a building, you're going to build it today and it's going to last 50 years. The cost to have that building designed by me was 1% of the overall cost of that building over its 50-year lifespan. The cost of building it, remarkably, on average, is only 11% of the cost of that building over time. You can see what it is for energy. Anything you can do to reduce the amount of energy you spend in a building over time only saves you money for that 50 years. In 50 years, you can build no building that can't not be renovated, or should it be renovated in that 50 years, depending on how you want to think about it. So you're going to have to alter this building sometimes in that 50 years, because even the best buildings we design, the mechanical systems, there'll be improvement in lighting, the technology will change, use of the building might change. So you think about ARH, which is now being renovated right now, was renovated when I was on campus. in the 80s. It was probably renovated in the 50s, and then it was built, I think, in about 1924, maybe, something like that. So you think about it, the building's been almost around for 100 years. It's been renovated at least 3 times that I know of. Well, that's part of that. You're going to continue to spend money. Of course, you have to maintain the building, just basically, cleaning it and making sure it works. And then in some cases, and this is different, sometimes there can be financing, but even if you're building a building with financing, usually that financing is a 20-year metric, so you're not even thinking about it in terms of 50-year. You basically pay off buildings. Most colleges and universities, if they're borrowing to finance a building, pay it off in 20 to 30 years. 20 years is very common. So this is kind of sets the kind of stakes in terms of what things can you do using sustainable practices or LEED practices to reduce the cost overall of a building. If we can reduce the energy cost and we can reduce the maintenance, we're really reducing the long-term cost of your facility. We've also done a study, kind of a generic building, we call it Central Midwest. We wanted to find out, what's the actual system cost of making a building run. So example, the building we're in. The things we see, like lighting, 26% of the cost. Of course, you're either feeling the heat or the cooling in a building. Plug loads, interestingly, every year we've done this, plug loads continue to go up. And of course, that's exactly because all of you have laptops, you have a phone, we plug in more things than we ever have before. Water, domestic hot water, almost nothing. But look at the strategy. If you want to reduce energy consumption, it's not about necessarily how you heat or cool, but it's how you push that cool or heated air around the building. That's one of the largest costs. So in all the new facilities we're doing, we're always looking for ways to reduce this cost. And interestingly, one of the things that's been done in the new building, they're using what's called chilled beam technology, which reduces the fans in a building. What's interesting is that technology costs about 25% more than the technology that was designed and is used in this building, which is big air handlers pushing air to this location, heating the space. And so while it's a fairly large cost up front to do this chilled beam system, you don't run fans under that scenario. And so you immediately eliminate all of that cost. You combine that with the geothermal field like you have, where then the energy is, in a sense, once you built it free, and it will be free forever. The only other costs you have in providing that kind of heating and cooling system are the pumps that have to move the liquid, the glycol through the well, and then the glycol through the building to get to the chilled beams that then supply either chill or heated sources of heat, because they can do either one. So those are the kinds of strategies we're starting to look at more and more. It's just you have to find the right client, like a Grinnell, to spend that kind of money, because that's a lot of money, 25% above a normal system, to go ahead and do a mechanical system like that building. So, does anyone have classes in there? The new part? Have you noticed that is it quieter because there are no fans, or there should be no fans? And it should be generally, the temperature should be kind of much more even. It's not like it blows on and then shuts off because it heated up the space and then blows on again. It should be very even heating and cooling. So next time you're in there, kind of notice that and see if you can tell it all. So we would do that in every building, but generally it's very difficult for us, even clients like colleges and universities, to make that initial investment because it does cost so much. In terms of evaluation, I may have used the word payback a couple of times. You may have seen it on a couple of the other slides. Generally speaking, people talk about payback, and payback meaning we're going to invest that 25% in chill beams in this new building. How long will it take to pay back that 20% where I break even? Now, if you're going to keep the building, again, you're not a developer, you're going to keep it to 30, 40, 50 years, the paybacks can be a little bit above kind of this average 5 to 10. We're generally, when we talk about a good payback as it relates to LEED or sustainability, 8 to 10 is fine. You saw that photovoltaic was 25 years. Even in that, even being free, that's really kind of stretching the concept. The other thing we talk about is also this idea of the image of sustainability or the substance. So the filter scenario, you guys don't even know those filters, you'll never see them, you never know the importance of those filters. You'll never know about the chilled beams necessarily above the ceiling. Those are the things you spend a lot of money on, but you don't see. And for a lot of people, sustainability, they want to also be able to see sustainability. So there are these kind of feel-good gestures that are sustainable. Some of the favorite ones are having a green roof that you can see and look out on. Or we did a project, and you know, I have to say, not that I believe in it, we did photovoltaics on a roof, but from anywhere around the building, you couldn't see that there were photovoltaics on the roof. So you think, again, it was very, very sustainable, but you know, did it feel good? Did it make people think, wow, this is great, look at the investment they've made? No, it really didn't. So what we did was then take one panel of sustainable photovoltaic and mount it on the ground, and then do a plaque that says on the roof is all this photovoltaic, these photovoltaic panels. So at least we got a little bit of marketing out, and it made it a little bit from a gesture standpoint. People then recognize the investment that was done. And so what's also interesting, and I already alluded to this a little bit earlier, about the early projects that were LEED projects or sustainable projects were not necessarily very good, unfortunately, because it was really, it was a test, and there was a lot of research that hadn't supported what some people were deciding to do. So I love the 2 bullet points. LEED buildings use less, and some LEED buildings use more. And so some of the early ones were real failures. Oberlin, again, where we've done some work, they're very sustainable. They have their own level of sustainability. They did one of the first net zero buildings ever in the country. And it was basically, it was a horrible failure. And it's still there today. It's still kind of a failure. But they learned so many things from it, and so many other people learned things from it. It was okay. So, I mean, they still use the building. They tried to do a net zero building about 25 years ago, including an indoor terrarium, so that it actually would produce its own oxygen. That didn't work. They wanted to also use the terrarium as and it was large, you know, it was the size of this room, it was like an indoor greenhouse. They wanted it to not only produce oxygen, but also scrub or clean the oxygen. And then they had a whole other series of things that were in the building that were very sustainable. You know, give them full credit for, you know, pushing that hard. Hasn't worked out, but they learned from it. So the interesting thing is, and you know, kind of from our research, there's very little correlation between the measured performance and what folks are getting points for. So that's why LEED has now changed. They're requiring this year of analysis. They kind of learned quickly that their early success stories were failures, and they changed the system by which they do it. So we went ahead and we plotted a whole series of the buildings we did. Again, we've got our engineers kind of always monitoring these. And basically, for the energy efficiency points, remember there were 33, but they're the ones specific to saving energy, there were only about 12. You know, even some of our buildings were all over the chart. So, you know, this was a great building. It was a building in Utah. It's 45% savings, but I think we got 3 points for it. So again, it's kind of embracing the idea of doing sustainability. It's okay to do it through LEED, but you want to, it's not always about the points. It's more about where do you want to find yourself on this chart, and think more about what's our real target. You know, we want to have substantial cost savings as they relate to energy consumption in the building. So for that reason, that's a little goofy there, but for that reason, we talk about, we use this chart to discuss kind of the high actual, low perceived value of sustainable approaches. That's photovoltaics you can't see on the roof, a filter you'll never see in a mechanical room, versus the high perceived but low actual benefit. One of my favorite ones, and I don't think you have any on your campus, but in some fitness centers we saw where they would, whether you were riding a bike on an elliptical, you would generate electricity by just using the fitness equipment, which of course would then be collected and then put onto the grid, so to speak, or help run the lights in the building. That is a feel-good example because those also failed miserably. They are not really sustainable. And the best example, and I wanted to put the photo in here, but I couldn't find it, but the Drexel University in Philadelphia has a fitness center, big fitness area like this, all the equipment's attached and powering up when everybody's on it. You know what they're lighting? They're lighting a big sign on the wall that says, boy, look what we're doing for sustainability. They're literally lighting the sign. They're not even giving it back to the lights or anything else. So that's that feel good, but really not produce a true sustainable outcome. So at least in the rec centers we do. We don't suggest that because it's kind of a lame solution. One of the other things we do, this is very similar to the scorecard that I passed around. We also look at, again, whether or not there's perceived value or actual value. So we've expanded on the original lead chart that went around. You're still looking at, this is site development category. You're still looking at whether or not you're going to get a positive outcome, whether it's a question and still has to be looked at, or whether you're not going to get a point for various categories of the different lead opportunities. What we've done is expand that to color coded to then say whether or not we've really got a good chance of whether it's perceived value or actual. So we're helping our clients kind of make the decision. And again, this doesn't have to be, if we're doing a lead equivalent, we still use this as a tool, but it doesn't have to be a certified project, but we still use this to give them an idea about, okay, so you want to do this, you want to try to get this, this roof, heat island effect roof credit. Well, it costs a lot of money. The perceived value is actually not, the payback is minimal. The actual value is kind of, well, the actual value is 10. So we've done this strategy of looking at every one of the different points and helping our clients kind of make the decision, perceived versus actual. What do you think is most valuable to you as an institution? So we've done that, and we found it to be really very useful. When we start a project on a campus, while we have lots of meetings about what people want in the building, we also have a whole series of workshops or meetings about how do you want to integrate the sustainability of the project. So this comes out of that sustainability structure that we're used to doing. And then the last piece of this, and this was the early Grinnell Husk example, the cost of LEED specifically. Now, whether or not we're pursuing a sustainable project, there is still substantial cost in the design things we do to make a building sustainable for the future. But when you specifically do it to also get a registered project, it even costs more. And so my example of spending almost $400,000 to do all of this and this, that was a better $400,000 in investment in the building rather than going for points. Particularly when you do a larger building, because the one thing they do is buildings are priced on the cost per square foot. So they have these formulas where you can figure out exactly what what the system will cost. That's just what you pay LEED. You still have to then pay your architect. If you have a LEED consultant, we are our own, you don't need one with us. In-house team members, the research and design that goes into the process. The other part of LEED, which is kind of it's a technical component, but we do what's called third-party commissioning or consulting. I'm guessing they took that $400,000 and not going after LEED, but my guess is the college paid for a commissioning consultant. And what they basically do is while you have engineers on our team design it, and you have McGough, which is the builder over here, build it with a whole series of subcontractors. You have to think about these. These buildings are one-off, very complicated, and highly technical buildings. And for that reason, you pay a third-party engineer to go in to make sure that it was built the way it was designed, and then they test it to make sure it's running smoothly. It's valuable. We tell all of our clients they should do this regardless of whether or not they're pursuing any LEED or any kind of sustainability, because it actually will save you a significant amount of money over time just to make sure the building's working properly. But this is a part of that large cost because you're paying a third party. And then also, outside of just the $400,000, so Grinnell decided to not spend $400,000 pursuing points and a plaque, but the commitment they made in the cost of the actual construction, you have to factor that in. the chilled beams and the geothermal field. I mean, I don't know the actual value, but believe me, the investment in that building had to be in the millions of dollars because of the nature of the sustainability things they did over there. Again, the payback, based on an investment, actually would be probably very positive as well. So I did mention what does it actually cost to do a LEED building based on points. So this is looking at the different levels. You can see them across the bottom. This is the cost. The interesting thing is we have 4 different folks that share with us what they think the average cost. GSA is the General Services Administration. That's the federal government. They build, they're like Walmart. They build more buildings than anybody else. They have their own metric. The other 3 are these are all companies that are cost estimators around the company. So they're always tracking this every year. And while they differ in opinion, you can still see that, you know, the difference between platinum from 4 to over 10% in that range. One, that's a really wide range, but that makes sense because you've got so many different choices you can make that cost a fair amount of money. But that, you know, wide range, I think the building over here is a $100 million project, if I'm correct. It's something in that category. So, you know, that would suggest they're spending somewhere between 4 and 10 million on just sustainable strategies in that building, which in the case of this building, I could see that being the case. Then again, they're going to, you know, Grinnell's going to own that building forever. So, you know, it's almost getting free energy out of it over the life of the building. One of the other things, and this is provided by the US GBC, they also tell us, and I find this kind of interesting, but they also tell us what are the most common points in this system of evaluation, and what are the least common ones that are used in terms of scoring points, you know, for the system. So reuse, not very common. It's the lowest of all of them, meaning very few people go after the 10-point of materials in a project being salvaged or reused. Again, they give you points for reusing and recycling buildings. Reusing existing building elements, use on-site renewable energy. That's one of the most expensive categories of things to do. That's why it's one of the fewest points people go after. If Grinnell were going after this, they would have more than enough. They'd be getting a ton of points for using renewable energy sources. Rapidly renewable materials, example, bamboo. Anybody been in the admissions building? You know what the floor is in the admissions building? It's cork. So cork, you know, is stripped off. Cork is a renewable growing product. It's stripped off trees. So whether it's cork on an old tack board or cork on the floor. And so it's a renewable source. But there are not very many of those available to us. There just aren't. There's bamboo and cork. There's just not very many things that we make or grow or build that are renewable. If you ever go to the new admissions building, that choice of cork on the floor was a horrible choice. Because I was over there earlier today, and it is the worst thing you can put on a floor and then have people come in and out all day on a snowy environment like you have in Iowa. The floor's already been really scarred and marked up. I talked to the custodian. She has to wipe it down 2 or 3 times a day, particularly between tours, because you don't want to walk in. The floor literally gets filthy. They get wood steps up to the 2nd floor and cork on the 2nd floor. The wood steps are already scarred from sand on those steps, because what you do here, you're very sustainable in that this campus does not use salt. They use sand during bad weather. Well, the sand, I noticed, was already on the 2nd floor. Even with you wiping it off, unless you take off your shoes in the admissions building, that floor is not going to last. Now, so that was a feel-good choice of sustainability that will probably ultimately end up costing the school more over time, maintaining it and protecting it, or someday probably replacing it. So those are the kinds of things. We would never have suggested that in that building, because I think we did it once and learned 10 years ago it was a terrible mistake, because it's really not made for high traffic areas. So, let's see. There's another category for 5%. They're very similar. You'll see this reuse, on-site renewable. There are different categories for this, so that's another low point. So you can see, even reusing building exterior. Now, because they're keeping all of the old ARH, other than replacing the windows, again, Brunel would be using that point, but as you can see, most schools, most users don't do it. When you flip it around and use the most common points that are used in this system, well, you have to have someone like me, an accredited professional, involved to go ahead and get to even submit a project. So I'm not quite sure why 3%, that should be 100%. The other ones are very interesting how market, particularly for the econ folks, how market-driven changes have driven the industry. There are the top other, all of these, well, except for boosting energy performance, these three all relate to kind of the product pressure. One of them is low emitting paints. It used to be that all paints in the old days had really bad chemicals, petroleum-based, smelly, really bad for your health products to make that paint last thick. We now use all water-based. So the VOAs, or what they're called, have been taken out of this, and it was really primarily driven by the market and the demand of the marketplace. So now paint companies, you can't find paint that isn't water-based. It's really difficult to find old school paint and adhesives, the things that, of course, when you walk in a new building and there's a new building smell, that's mostly gone away. So when you go in a new sustainable building with none of those smells, that means it's very good for you as a user. What industry has not embraced this at all? Anybody tell me? Any guess? Any industry that hasn't done these kind of low VOCs and adhesives?
The oil industry?
Which one?
The non-renewable energy industry?
Yeah, not necessarily. Think about when you buy a new car. New car smell. They've not done anything about that. So when you get in a new car, for the first month you're driving around in that new car, you're sucking in more dangerous off-gassing of the carpet, the adhesive, the glues, the fake wood paneling, the plastics. And for that reason, when I rent a car, I always request an old car. I don't want to be in a brand new car because it's really not very good for you. So that's unfortunately an industry that needs to keep working on this. The other top ones, water use. This has been fantastic because the plumbing industry has kind of taken it on. And now almost everything you buy plumbing related deals with saving water rather than using a lot of it. Diverting construction waste from landfills. Really very difficult to do here in Brunel. So again, as a strategy, I doubt they were able to do this on the project over here because in some areas you don't have the means by which you can recycle construction waste. So the things, when they're throwing away the windows out of the old building, replacing them with new high energy windows, I don't know what they're going to do with those windows other than maybe take them to a landfill. Because in this middle of Iowa, I really doubt there's any way to actually go ahead and deal with that waste. Now, when we do projects that are in large urban areas, we've had great success in tearing down buildings and having almost all the building recycled in some manner or another. On some of the cards, we did a project that's floating around that was in Birmingham. We took down a 1975-story building, replaced it with a completely new sustainable building. We recycled, but the contractor that tore the building down recycled 90% of that building. So only 10% of it went to a landfill, which is really remarkable, but you have to have the distribution system available to you to go ahead and recycle all the different things that are in a building like that. So that's why we see that one now about diverting waste from the landfill. It's still a fairly high one. So to get close to wrapping up and leave a few minutes for discussion, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about our own firm and as an organization. Of course, we embrace sustainability because almost all of our clients do. I had mentioned earlier, it's in our DNA, so it doesn't matter where I look, where I walk, I'm always looking for the sustainable things that either have been done or have not been done in a building. Again, we're very unique in that everyone professional now, our receptionist, our marketing people, they're not lead professionals because it's not required of them, but any of our architects Even our intern architects are called associate lead professionals. So we have 100% of our staff. We do recycle. We continue to do research, and we do research projects every summer. We hire a couple of interns every summer that sit in our office and do research that relate to sustainable practice. We have to do a lot of things, but that's one of the things we have to do. We also do work and also receive research and design credits. That is something the federal government is still doing, particularly for design firms. So the more research we do in sustainable practice, we get some refunds on our taxes. But for the first time ever, we're moving we haven't moved our office for years. So we're moving our office, and so we've decided to do, well, it's finally time for us to kind of, practice what we preach. So we're going to do what we can to make our new office as sustainable as we can. So you see some of the things we're considering. Now what's interesting is we're buying a 1980s speculative office building. So as I mentioned earlier, about as cheap you can build. I mean, it has almost no insulation in it, cheap windows. It's been renovated probably 10 times in those 40 years. And so we're renovating it for our use, but we're doing everything we can to make it as sustainable as we can. We are not pursuing the LEED points though. We are going to do it because now there's a LEED category for interiors, because the one thing we can't do is we can't reskin the building. I mean, that would be, which is not cost effective, we're not a big firm. But we're going to do everything we can by the LEED standards to go ahead and do anything we can in that space. We will not have a cork floor in our office, I can tell you that. But we're going to have mostly concrete, we're going to have recycled carpet. So we're doing a lot of those things. We're going to start composting. Because it's our own building now, we actually have a place outside the building. We're going to do composting. We're still going to recycle. All the mechanicals being 100% replaced. That's one thing where even though it's an old building, we thought we could do that, and then all the lighting will be LED lighting. So those two things together will make the building that much more sustainable. We're contemplating a charging station. Now this is kind of in the category of feel good, because as of right now, not one of our employees, or we think any of our clients that at least would drive to our office, have an electric car. But we're contemplating it, because I might buy one. I have never owned an electric car. So we're thinking about that. We're also investigating the photovoltaic opportunity. We do have a fairly good-sized roof. We've tested to see that it can support it. Now we want to see if we can cost-effectively, through some grant and rebates from the energy company, go ahead and put some photovoltaics. We know, because we've already done the research, or the engineering, the building's not big enough to put enough photovoltaics on that roof to actually power our building. We actually are fairly heavy consumers of electricity because every architect has 2 monitors, big servers. We generate a lot of heat, require a lot of electricity because of how we then make architecture. So we're looking at that. Opposite that are the things that we're not going to do from a sustainable practice standpoint. You saw how much I travel, where everybody in our office travels a substantial amount. So we all have a very large carbon footprint. We could start buying offset credits, and I'm assuming you guys have either had other talks about that or have read about it. We could start doing that to try to change, quote, our energy consumption. In a sense, we're paying someone else to save money somewhere else, and they're getting a tax benefit, we're paying for it. So we're not going to do that because I just personally don't think that's not necessarily, while we'd like to say it's going to change behavior. In our case, we're an office, we generate a certain amount, we require a certain amount of travel and a certain amount of energy use, and until that travel becomes cheaper, or I should say more sustainable, we don't really think that's a good way to do that. We've talked about buying an electric car, but we've kind of decided we don't think we'll do it. It would only work for us within about a 2-hour drive time because, of course, electric cars have a limit on how far you can drive. And while we often drive to clients it's actually more cost effective from a time standpoint to sometimes drive 5 hours than try to fly to go see that client. We did the math, and the electric car just won't pencil out because there's no place where we're driving. It would be like driving to Grinnell. Do you know how many charging stations are between St. Louis and Grinnell, Iowa? I looked. I think there's one. and it happens to be in an Arby's in Kirksville or somewhere. It's really very interesting where they put charging stations that can be used, like a Tesla charging station. And then the other thing, this is something that the really big firms, again, the firm that did the new building over here, they often have full-time lead administrators. It's a position. You know, if that's something, if you're a biology and environmental science, if you want to get your lead and work for a big firm, you know, you don't have to be an architect to do everything I talked about from the standpoint of doing lead and sustainable projects as an administrator, because what you're doing is the paperwork and meeting with people and talking about all the things. You don't have to be an architect to do that. Well, we're not a big enough firm to actually have someone be full-time and do that for us. But, as I said, all of our staff, of course, can do that themselves. So some of the really big firms have several people like that, but we just aren't big enough to do that yet. So ready for a little bit of discussion, but I did want to take you, I have to walk around so I can see better, but I did want to show you just a few projects that we've done, and the different, these are LEED projects, not LEED equivalents, so these have actually gotten their certification. But the interesting thing about LEED, early LEED projects always looked really modern and hip. They were really cool, fancy buildings, because everybody thought, well, that means it's sustainable. It's glass and fancy, and it's got photovoltaics all over it. Well, you could also do buildings, you know, renovate and repurpose buildings like this, and they can achieve platinum. What you don't see are photovoltaics. Very similar to the Brunel project that has a huge green field over here with wells, a very super high quality glass. Even though we have a lot of glass, it's you know, the highest quality, most expensive glass we can buy. So there's a project at WashU. We did a project in Berea College. I don't know if you've ever heard of Berea College. It's in Kentucky. It's one of the last remaining schools where all students worked on campus. That's part of the requirement of being accepted there. If you live within 90 miles of Berea and you are in a certain level economically, you're guaranteed a free education from Berea. But they did a deep green residence hall. You can see it's platinum. They're a very interesting campus because they made all the furniture for the building, and they made furniture from wood that they harvested out of the forest. They own about 28,000 square feet, or 28,000 acres of oak forest in Kentucky. And so they went in and cut those trees down, dried them, milled them, and then turned them into the ceilings. We did ceilings, we did furniture, we used that wood in the building. So that's how far they kind of embrace you know, their sustainability. The wild part of it is, when you talk about cutting the trees down, they cut them down not using gas-powered chainsaws. They did it old school. It goes really long, you know, like the old movies. And then they didn't haul them out with a truck. They used teams of oxen to pull each one of the logs out of the forest and then deliver it on site, where they then prep the wood before it was then drying and milled in their own shops. So I mean, this is, well, you know, this is hardcore stuff going on at Berea. Other projects, a gold project, turns out it's a battery research facility we did at the University of Kentucky. So they're actually doing like Tesla level battery research in a gold building that we did. A rec center, Colorado State University. You can see the climbing wall, a lot of glass, nice big building, very transparent, gold. A science building. Science buildings like this building, they're a struggle for those to be highly sustainable because they are on 24/7. They have a huge, because of the hoods, they have a huge loss in energy because you're always having to suck air out of every lab in this building. But you can see, you know, even with minor work, we were able to get silver out of that. We did a project for the Salvation Army. One of their facilities was silver. And then a registered college in William and Mary, they're a very historic campus. Registered engineering school at John Brown Little College in Arkansas, you know, and very interesting that this teeny little college that almost nobody knows about, every project we've done on their campus is sustainable. What's interesting is it's registered, but look at the photovoltaics. but the rest of the points they were going after, they didn't qualify for, but they got a bunch for having photovoltaics, but it wasn't enough to get beyond register. But then again, just wanted to show you some of those. Just for part of the discussion, you know, in summarizing, I will tell you that LEED's not perfect, but boy, has it set in motion a completely different method by which we design buildings. So it's really fascinating. It's in our DNA. It's affordable. We try to tell people that you shouldn't practice the idea of you have to pay more for sustainable practices. They should just be a part of the project. You shouldn't think of it as an add-on. If you're going to do a $10 million project, you should just make it sustainable, and then not think about making it $10 million. Oh, and we're going to add $1 million of sustainable things to that building. So, in any case, open for questions. I know I'm going to hang around for the coffee and dinner, but any questions? Anybody want to be a lead professional someday and work in the business?
What are you currently working on?
Oh, currently working on, I have projects all over the country. So we do have a really unique, we're doing a basketball arena for the University of Idaho. It's going to seat 4,000 students or spectators, and it's not even, we're not pursuing LEED, but it's going to be like double platinum by the time we get done. The entire project is going to be made out of wood. So, you know, you think about it, in most arenas, or the bare, the only thing really wood is the floor, right? The basketball court. This entire facility, roof, everything, is an entirely wood structure. It's being sponsored, of all people, by the Idaho Wood Products Manufacturers Association or something like that. So that's one. I've got projects in New York. I'm trying to think where I've been traveling recently. Evansville, Indiana, doing a project for the university there. They're just all over. We've got several projects in Florida. I don't think where else I can go on. I will tell you something. I've never done a project here at Grinnell. For all the different schools I've worked for, never here.
Berea College is platinum, aren't they?
Yeah, it was platinum. Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, they pursued platinum. Actually, at Berea, that building was platinum, but we also did the Green Initiative version, which is green globes. So it received 5, they do globes or petals. So it received all 5 petals for that building. But yeah, it's pretty interesting that they chose to do it that way.
If a college approached you and said they really wanted to go after the LEED certification, do you kind of explain how sometimes that's not the standard that you want to go for, or would you try to?
Yes, we will have that conversation with them. To the extent that, you know, like a number of states, I think there are 23 states, again, I think I mentioned earlier, where the legislature in that state has said every project will be LEED that is government funded. Or it'll be LEED, but it'll be LEED silver. Some of the states actually say what level you need to get to.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll have a discussion with them. LEED silver is not too difficult to do, but it's not easy either. But we always have that discussion about things that we think are, while you can get points, I really don't believe in them.
Okay.
My least favorite one, you get a point if you provide a parking space associated with your project that is specific to, the sign says, you know, it's only for, oh gosh, what do you call it when you get a lot of people in one car? Carpooling. Thank you. I didn't think of that. You get a point for having a sign that supposedly is going to change behavior and have a spot so the carpoolers can park there. I think that's the failure of LEED, and that is a 100% false proposition, because it doesn't really change behavior. I don't think it really changes behavior, because if in that parking lot there's plenty of other parking, you know what we're going to do. Americans drive all the time by themselves. So that's always one. For the $55 sign that buys you a point, I really struggle with. The other ones on the far end, when people get into the platinum spectrum, you can buy a lot of points relating to, you can buy credits, you can buy wind power points, you can purchase those extra points. And I also find that to be, I mean, that's you know, you're gaming the system. So we have that conversation all the time, and, you know, for some people, for colleges and universities, if you can just say the building's sustainable and it saves you money, that gets most of them where they want to be, so.
Yeah, that kind of made me wonder, is there really a point in like pursuing a LEED certification now? Because like if we have those standards and you understand like, because you can't talk about like it was like a measurement or like it set a standard because now we know what to go about and what like we know how to obtain these points. But like if you know how to build a sustainable building, you have LEED certified architects, usually people working. Is it really worth spending that like $400,000 just to have that plaque that says your building is platinum gold or whatever, if really the whole point of it being sustainable is just being it sustainable?
You're singing my song, because that's, we still do LEED certified projects, again, because the state work we do often, I have a project, actually, you asked about project, I have a project, Penn State, and Pennsylvania requires projects to be LEED silver, so we are pursuing the LEED silver part of it. The slide that said, what are the benefits? Pretty thin set of benefits, if you ask me. And that's why, you know, I was perfectly happy to hear that Grinnell, I mean, I'm not sure it's exactly 400,000, but I remember somebody sharing that with me. You know, 400,000, that went for a lot of other stuff. But, you know, I think that's a good way to do it. So.
Do you think LEED or US, I'm sorry, I forget the acronym for whoever does LEED, will adapt, or do you think that the organization will come in to try and incentivize organizations to do this, or will it all be kind of privatized from now on, or how do you think?
Privatized, probably not, because there's still too many economic factors for people to not do sustainable architecture. Again, every developer, I have a very good friend in St. Louis who is a developer, and he's very different from most developers, is that when he's a commercial developer, so he basically designs strip malls and he builds and owns them. He's a little bit different from most developers in that he keeps them and he lives off the income that they generate. So, but he still builds them like he was a developer that was going to flip them. And I've had a conversation, he plays poker with me, so I've had the conversation with him about, well, why don't you spend just, you know, 2 or 4% more? If you're going to own these buildings for 15, 20, 30 years until you retire, why don't you invest just a little bit more, and then actually you'll be making even more money. But he just doesn't get it, or doesn't want to go there. Now, it's not in his DNA as a developer business person to make that step yet. So not everybody's on the same page now. Are we done? We're done? Thank you.